In this short video, I'm going to be talking about some examples of user input using a scanner, which should be helpful in all of the homework projects you have and the labs, since Scanner is a really popular class to use because it provides a lot of different options for user input that make reading from user input streams really easy. So we'll be going over the use of header comments. I'm going to show you how to use Javadoc to get information about classes, especially in this case the scanner class. We're going to look at the attributes of the nextInt method, which is a very useful method of the scanner class. We're going to talk a little bit about how to store user input in a variable and why that's necessary. And we're also going to show what it looks like to close out the scanner resource with a call to the close method. So here's a very short program that I've written in order to do this video. Take a quick look at it. Some parts of it will be very familiar to you already. You should see that I have imported the scanner class from Javadoc. I've got I've created a class here called Input Snafus. It's just a sample class for me to write this one main method and mess with input. So it's got this main method, which you've seen in our other programming examples already. And I've declared keyboard as a variable to point to a scanner, and I've created a new scanner object using system_in, and I've assigned it into that keyboard variable. So I'd like you to take a look at this program and maybe think about what is going to happen when I run it. Consider the rest of the lines of the program and what they do, and make a guess about what's going to happen when I run this program. Alright, so let me run it and you can see if you guessed correctly. I'll hit the run button here. And notice we don't really see anything going on in the console window right here. The cursor is just blinking there. I'm going to guess that it's waiting for user input since this is a user input program. So I'll type in a number 12 and I'm going to hit enter, and it then goes to the print line statement and prints out that message. So I don't know if that's what you guessed was going to happen, but that's how this program works right now. So my question is, even though this says this is the integer the user typed in, why does it not type out or output the integer that I typed in, 12? Well, if you notice, in my call to nextInt, I didn't actually assign it into a variable. So what does that mean? Well, let's take a second to look at how nextInt works. And in order to do that, I've pulled up the Javadoc for the class scanner. Now, the Javadoc is a system for creating documentation for any Java class. It's actually something that you can incorporate into your own programming. And what it does is it will read the comments that you've put into your code, as long as you adhere to a certain kind of format that's determined by the people who created the Javadoc utility. It will read the comments and it will actually generate documentation that users will be able to look at if they want to use the classes that you've created. And so all of the Java libraries that are provided to you with your Java installation, all the libraries that you can use in your own programs, come with their Javadoc documentation. And this is actually available online, and I'll provide the link to you. There'll be a link in the description of this video and also a link in my courses, so you can look for it yourself. But if you look at the overview, you'll see all the packages of Java libraries. There's a lot of them. Okay. And java.util is one of those packages. And the class scanner is in java.util. If we scroll down in the class scanner, we'll see that there are a lot of sections to the Javadoc. And one of the sections I just want to direct your attention to at this time is the list of methods that are in the scanner class. And this is a summary of those methods, of the list of methods. And what you'll see is that there are a lot of different methods, which means that the scanner class has a lot of functionality to it that you can take advantage of. And one of the most useful methods in this list is the nextInt method, which you can call. And if I click on that nextInt method, it takes me to a page that describes what you can do with the nextInt method. It actually describes it gives the definition of the method. It tells us that it's a public method, which means that we can call it if we create a scanner. And it tells us that the name of the method is nextInt. It also tells us that it returns an integer. And you can actually see that here as well. Returns the int scanned from the input. So what does that mean when I say that nextInt returns an integer? Well, it means that when I call nextInt by putting the name of the scanner variable here, the scanner object, the variable that's containing the reference to the scanner object, and then I put a dot and nextInt here, that's calling the nextInt method. When I call that nextInt method, once the user types in a value, so that that value is read in, that this entire statement here evaluates to an integer. In other words, that when it returns an integer, this takes on the value of an integer. So it's almost as if someone in the program typed in the literal 12, which means that you can do the same thing with this statement that you would do with an integer literal, or specifically with an int literal. Which means if we had a variable that was an integer, we could use the assignment operator, the equal sign, to assign this value on the right into that int on the left. So this is why it's important to have a variable here. If we have a variable, we can actually store what the user typed in. We can store it so we can use it later. Because without this variable, yeah, Java will call nextInt, but then we won't be able to do anything with the value that the user entered because we failed to store it. It just would get entered into Java, and then it would just go nowhere. So we need an integer. We need an int some number so that we are able to capture that user input. So aside from the scanner, oops, let me make the white space like this. So these are my variable declarations, and here I'm using some number for the first time by reading into it. Okay, so we have some yellow warning symbols over here, and so let's take a look at what those are trying to tell us by mousing over them. So as I mouse over this, it tells me resource leak, keyboard is never closed. Okay, so that warning is telling me that if I'm going to use a scanner, then I should call the close method of that scanner when I'm done using that resource. Why is that? Well, as I mentioned in a previous video, whenever you use a resource like user input, it allocates memory for that. It also reserves the use of that input so that other parts of the system can't use it. So in a way, it ties up that resource. And when you're done, you should release that resource so that the system can work efficiently. So what I'm going to do at the end of this program, actually I need to do it at the end of this method, is I'm going to call keyboard.close. Okay, and by doing that, if you notice, the warning now goes away. So this is just something to notice about the way Eclipse works. If you have some warnings in your code, you can mouse over them and learn something about how you might change your code in order to improve it. Here, this other warning is telling us that the value of the local variable sum number is not used. And that warning is kind of just letting us know that since the variable is not used, maybe we didn't mean to add this variable. Also, by having this warning in here, if we thought we used the variable, if we intended to use it, and then we didn't, this warning should just jog our memory that this variable exists, so that maybe we should pay attention and fix whatever situation it is that is not right because we're not using this variable. And in our case, I meant to use the variable in this output function, and I hadn't done it yet. So this is actually a useful reminder. So I'm going to change the output function to add sum number. And then once I save, that warning goes away. So those are some examples of how those warnings can be used to help your programming experience go more smoothly. It's one of the reasons that we use a language-sensitive editor like the one that's built into Eclipse, because it really can give us some help along the way. Okay, now what happens when we run this modified version of our code? So it starts out very similar. There's no message here or anything. I'm going to type in a number, and now of course it actually gives us the number in the output, which is great. That's a big improvement. However, another improvement is that whenever you're doing user input, you really should have a prompt for the user. Otherwise, your user is not going to know what to do when they encounter the computer waiting for input, especially since the computer is waiting and not doing anything while it's allowing the user to have a chance to input a number. Plus, we don't know, if we're a user who's come along and just encountered this program without any kind of prompt, we don't know what to enter. Let's see what happens when we don't enter a number. So I'm going to save. I've commented out this line, so the program should run the same. Okay, so it's waiting for user input, and instead of a number, I'm going to type in some letters that do not amount to a number. I'm going to hit return, and what happens is Java throws an exception. Why are we seeing an exception in this case? First of all, what is an exception? So because you'll probably see this in your own programs, an exception is a kind of a runtime error that gives us some information about why the program has stopped. And so this happens when the program stops because of some kind of unexpected condition, or a condition that just prevents the program from continuing at all. And what has stopped this program from going on is this java.util.input mismatch exception. Okay. And it actually tells me, okay, that it's in the main thread. So it's in the thread for this main method, and it's telling me it's line 11. So I don't currently have line numbers showing. Okay, it just turned on the option to show line numbers in the Eclipse preferences, and so that allows me to actually see where line 11 is and get a little bit more information about where I went wrong. And so it's telling me that this line 11 is where it went wrong, and what really happened is that the call to nextInt triggered this input mismatch exception because the user didn't enter an integer, and this was expecting an integer. So currently we don't have a way to prevent this kind of a problem from happening, at least by using nextInt. So at the moment, I'm not going to go into detail about how we handle this problem. But that is something that we will talk about in the future. I just wanted you to recognize that you could that you can get some information from an exception and find out where the problem is happening and know something about the nature of the problem. So there are other resources, other types of calls in to methods in the scanner to get different types of data. For instance, we can get an entire line from the we can say next line. And I'm just going to show you just quickly. Actually, some string. These aren't the most meaningful names for variables, but this is an example program, so these names serve as an explanation of what the heck these variables are. They're just a number and a string used for demonstration purposes. Notice that we have another error here. Or this is not just a warning, but this is a slightly more serious error. When I mouse over it, notice it tells me the local variable sum number may not have been initialized. That's because it is declared here, but no value is ever put into it. Okay, so when I run this, even though it tells me there are errors, I can proceed, but then it's going to do this because it knows that there's a problem at line 14. So we're going to remove this reference to some number, and I'm going to change this. This is the line the user typed in, and I'm going to put a new line, and I'm going to add some string here. Okay. Now I'm going to, so what I've done here is instead of reading in an integer, instead of reading in an int from the stream through the keyboard, I'm going to read the entire line and next line, which is a method of scanner objects, is going to allow me to get the entire string that the user enters, regardless of whether it's an integer or not, from the user. And just to demonstrate that there's Javadoc on that, you can see here's the documentation for next line, and it tells us that it advances the scanner, passes the current line, and it returns the input that was skipped. So in other words, it looks for a return or an enter, and then it evaluates to the entire line that the user entered. Okay, you can see that it returns a string here because the return type of this method is a string. All right, so let's run it and see what that looks like here. Oh, that's right. So we never gave a prompt to tell the user what to type in. So I'm actually going to terminate the program forcibly using the red button. I just want to add that prompt in there because it really is very annoying to have user input without some kind of direction given to the user. It's really difficult to even tell if the program is still running if it's not doing anything. Okay, so this will tell us that it's waiting for input. And we save, and it says please type something in, so I know to go to the console, and I'm just gonna type gibberish like I did last time, and hit enter. And what it does is says this is the line that the user typed in, and it repeats the gibberish. Okay? So basically, this is how input works using a scanner. You can do a lot more flexible things if you decide to parse the string. You can read everything. If you want to avoid errors, you can read everything the user types in as a string, because as you can see, you can type pretty much whatever you want Oops, in the wrong place. You can type in whatever you want here, and as long as you can type it in, it's legal as a string. And once you do that, once you get the data from the user as a string, there are things you can do to try to pull out different parts of the string to make meaning out of it, and then you can actually tell if the user typed in an integer or not. So there are ways to avoid having an error thrown in your program and do error checking. We'll get to that a little bit later in this course, but know that it's coming. For now, you know a little bit about reading in input from the user, which will make your programs much more interesting and flexible and in the future. If you have any questions, feel free to bring them up in class or contact me at any point during the course.